مساء الخير جميعاً وأهلا وسهلا فيكم باللقاء الثاني على زوم يلي عم تعقده أوفير للطباعة والنشر بالشراكة مع ميديا أسوشيتس انترناشونال ضمن سلسلة لقاءات تحت عنوان اليقين في أجواء عدم اليقين. وهذه اللقاءات تأتي قبل إطلاق مبادرة الكتاب المسيحيين العرب والتي تعرف بكاوي Christian Arab Writers Initiative، وهي مبادرة ابتدأت قبل 10 سنين لتدريب وتمكين قلم كل كاتب عربي مسيحي، والهدف هو إثراء المكتبة العربية حول العالم بمحتوى مسيحي عربي أصيل. تبدأ هذه المبادرة ب5 نوفمبر الشهر القادم. لكل الأشخاص اللي حابين يعرفوا أكثر عنا ويكونوا جزء منها فيكم تزوروا الموقع الإلكتروني www.christianarabwriters.com وفيكم تسجلوا بهذه المبادرة. لقائنا اليوم لكل الأشخاص اللي بحبوا يسمعوه باللغة العربية رح يكون في ترجمة فورية. على يمين الشاشة بتلاقوا في آيكون مكتوب Interpretation، بتضغطوا على الآيكون وبتختاروا German. إذن مرة أخرى للأشخاص اللي حابين يتابعوا هذا اللقاء باللغة العربية رح يكون في ترجمة فورية. على يمين الشاشة بتضغطوا على آيكون مكتوب Interpretation وبتختاروا German. ومن الآن فصاعدا ستتحول هذه المقابلة إلى اللغة الإنجليزية. Certainty in uncertain times. If we look up the word uncertainty in the dictionary, we find different definitions. According to Cambridge Dictionary, uncertainty means the situation in which something is not known. Another definition for the word uncertainty, it is the feeling of not being sure what will happen in the future. Synonyms of the word also include doubt, suspicion, mistrust, skepticism, unknown. And as a result of this uncertain state we live in, worry, stress, fear, and anxiety creep into our lives and cripple us. Do these words and definitions ring a bell in our daily lives nowadays? I guess each one of us has had a glimpse or a full experience of flashes of uncertainties. And with the ripple effect of COVID-19 pandemic, whether mentally, socially, physically, emotionally, economically, and even spiritually, the whole world now, rich or poor, old or young, healthy or unhealthy, can relate to what it means to live in uncertain times. Knowing and realizing the importance to talk about this pressing topic from a personal and writer point of view, we're honored to host with us tonight a renowned Christian American author who knows the words uncertainty, disappointment, pain, and hurt very well, and he has written many related books about them. He is one of the few who is courageous enough to ask tough questions with maybe no answers, out of his genuine quest to find answers that quench a thirsty soul. And from these questions, timeless books came to life. Where is God when it hurts? What good is God? Prayer, does it make any difference? What's so amazing about grace? Is God unfair? Is God silent? Is God hidden? And despite the darkness of the scene, we always see hope, faith, and grace in his writings and books. That even when we don't have definite answers for these questions, we have an underlying, assuring faith in a loving God. With more than 20 titles published, 13 gold medallion awards from Christian publishers and booksellers, more than 15 million books in print published in over 50 languages worldwide, and Arabic is one of them, this one-of-a-kind writer takes his readers on a journey to explore the most basic and difficult questions of life and deepest mysteries of the Christian faith in a writing style that touches feelings and rational thinking combined together. Ophir has published into Arabic Disappointment with God عندما لا تمطر السماء, Soul Survivor بالكاد نجوت, The Question That Never Goes Away, السؤال الذي لا يغيب, Vanishing Grace, النعمة المغيبة, and Grace Notes, نغمات النعمة, in addition to other books published by Arab publishers. It's such an honor and privilege for me tonight to host the best-selling and very loved writer in the Middle East and worldwide, whose books in all languages have made a revolution in people's lives. Please welcome with me Mr. Philip Yancey to talk about his passion and gravitational force for writing and what keeps his pen flowing certainty amidst uncertain times. The microphone is yours, Philip. You're most welcome.
Thank you, Grace. It's good to be in the Middle East. I have been to many of your countries. I've been to Kuwait and Jordan and Lebanon several times, Egypt, UAE. The one place I haven't been is Israel. Don't tell anybody, okay? But I remember once I was in India, and I love reading the newspapers in India because they're written in English, but this kind of flowery Victorian type prose. And I would open my paper each day and they would keep reading, I would keep reading articles about the West Asia crisis, West Asia crisis. I thought, where's the West Asia crisis? And then I realized that's what we call the Middle East. It all depends on where you are in the world. To us, it's the middle, but to someone in Asia, it's just the edge of Asia. But you, of course, have been a central part of civilization since it's existed. You've been the cradle of civilization, and I'm honored to have my books published there in Arabic. I hear from Arab readers, and whenever I get invited, I try to make a point to go to that part of the world, especially when it's winter in the United States. I can go there and warm up a little bit because I live in a cold place, Colorado. I started as a magazine writer, a journalist. It was a magazine called Campus Life, part of Youth for Christ. I know there are Youth for Christ programs in some of your countries. And I'm so grateful for the time that I had, because here's what I learned. I learned that the writer is not the one in charge. The reader is the one in charge. Because we would send our magazines, often they would be given by a parent or an aunt who was concerned about little Johnny's spiritual health. I know, I'll give him a Christian magazine. So Johnny gets this magazine in the mail, and first he's kind of flattered. He doesn't get much mail, he's just 15 years old. But he opens it up and says, oh no, this is a Christian magazine. There's my aunt trying to convert me again. And I have one sentence, one paragraph, one page to catch Johnny's attention. Otherwise, he's just going to shut that magazine, and it doesn't matter how beautifully I write or how compellingly I write, if it's not something that grabs Johnny so that he wants to read that next paragraph, that next page. I learned that the reader is the boss. And that's an important thing to learn. A lot of people, when they go to graduate schools, they study writing and they like to write these esoteric poems that nobody can really understand, and they feel very creative, and that's great. I like reading some of that, but you can't easily make a living doing that. You have to write in such a way that it grabs people, that makes them want to encounter you again and to read a book, and then the next book, and then the next book, or the article, and then the next article, and the next article. So I've spent a lot of my time just trying to figure out what is it that makes writing work. In some ways, it's the most thin, I would say, of any form of art. A painting, you've got color. Sculpture, you've got three-dimensional. A movie, my goodness, you've got sound and visuals and writing. And then I turn to a book off my shelf, and I open it, and it's just so boring by contrast. It looks like somebody just took pepper and spilled it on the page. So how does it work? Well, of course, it wasn't always that way. Back in the very early days, before there was much written language and before people could read, stories were passed along orally. So people would be gathered, say, in a cave, and there's a fire going, and maybe you're holding a baby, and there's a lot of sensory activity going on with the act of hearing the story. But after Mr. Gutenberg and the printing press, we reduced it all to just what's on that page, the spilled pepper, the characters printed on that page. And yet, even though it has so little going for it, it can be a very powerful medium. You mentioned one of the books that Ophir has published of mine called Disappointment with God. Shortly after I wrote that, the civil war in Lebanon was going on. And I got a couple of very moving letters from Lebanon. One was a person who said, I've been reading your book and it's taking me a long time because I only read it when the bombs start falling and the shells are flying. And I live on the 13th floor and I make my way down the staircase in the dark, with my little flashlight torch. And I go to the basement, and there I have a kerosene lamp, and I light the lamp, and that's where I've been reading your book.
Wow.
And I mean, I was almost moved to tears thinking something I wrote. I'm thinking about my car doesn't work, or my computer crashes, or my girlfriend breaks up. Those are the disappointments I'm talking about. And she is applying those words to an incredible, very moving situation where it seems like the whole world is falling around her. And shortly after that, I got another letter from Lebanon, and this person had a beautiful apartment. And one day, members of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, showed up and said, "We want your apartment." And she said, "Well, this is my apartment." And they had guns. They said, "Get out, this is our apartment." And she said, not only that, but they were making me pay the utility bills, like the electricity and the heat. They take my apartment and then they're making me pay the electricity bills. And she said, then I read your book on what's so amazing about grace. And I realized I needed to have a gracious attitude. And once again, I'm thinking, man, I was thinking about how to get along with your neighbor who plays the music too loud, who lets the dog roam in your yard, not somebody who takes over your apartment. That's a whole different level of grace that I never had in mind. But that's the power of writing. It can jump across an ocean, across a culture. It can jump from mind to mind and actually change, make you think and see the world in a different way. Books have certainly done that for me. And in cases like this, because I hear letters from readers, I realize it's done it for other people in ways that I could not even have imagined. So it's got a certain power. I've written for a long time. You can see from my gray hair, I've been at it for a long time. And one thing I've learned is what I call the gravitational power. I'm looking for that force that pulls you, that keeps Johnny reading that article, that makes me want to finish my book. And it varies depending on what kind of thing you write. I like writing stories. So even though I'm writing books about ideas, they're filled with stories because we're people who like stories. But when I want to buy a new mobile phone, I want to find out what is the best mobile phone to buy. I don't want to read somebody's story about, I went down to the store, I opened the door, I just want to know, here are the best qualities to look for. So buy this phone, somebody who's very direct. Now, when somebody tries to use that form to preach to me about the gospel, even something that I'm in favor of, I just don't like being preached to in print. It seems to work better in a church. And if I feel like I'm being preached to, that doesn't carry me. I need something that is more of a story, that reflects more of my life rather than just, you need to change. This is what you need to do. So I try to look for what I call the gravitational force that makes me keep going, that just pulls me along so that I don't put it down, that I keep reading. And it took me a long time to figure out what mine was. When I started out at the magazine, and I would write advertisements, or once I wrote liner notes for a music album, or brochures trying to raise money. I would do whatever they told me. And that was good because it forced me to be diverse, and it forced me to think about different styles. But I finally settled on my style, and it's what I call a personal pilgrimage style. I was raised in a very unhealthy church. I call it a toxic church. And so I came to faith with a kind of a suspicious attitude, skeptical attitude. they told me some things that I found out were later wrong. It was a racist church, and I found out later that was not only wrong, it was sinful, it was evil. And that was a crisis of faith, because if they lied about race, maybe they lied about Jesus, maybe they lied about the Bible. And so the rest of my life, I've been going through each question, each part, taking a look at it, taking a look at what I was taught, taking a look at the Bible, going to people I trust, and trying to sort through what is worth saving and what is not. And so that's why I call it a personal pilgrimage. And the titles you mentioned, many of them are questions. Where is God when it hurts? And what do you do when you're disappointed with God? Does prayer really matter? Does it make a difference? That's my story. I've been kind of a one style person, sometimes in short articles, sometimes in long books, almost always in the first person, using the pronoun I, because it's my story. In the last few years, I've been writing a memoir, and I found that's a very different style. It's a style more like a novel. I'm telling a story from beginning to end, but it's not about ideas. It's not about how my mind changed. It's about how my life changed. And so childhood plays a much bigger role. And when you come up with different kinds of forms like that, you have to adapt. So let me mention a few things that I think we all have to keep in mind, no matter what you write, as a writer, to keep the reader's interest. The first one I call platform. Why should you listen to anything that I say? Why should I listen to anything that you say? Well, there's a busy world out there, and we get social media stuff, we get blogs, we get fake news, we get all this stuff all day long, and I've got to find a reason to give you some of my time. So what are the different platforms? Well, if you're famous, you've got a built-in platform. I read the other day that the Obamas, Barack and Michelle Obama, got $65 million for a few books that they're going to be doing. Why would a publisher pay $65 million? Well, they have a platform. He's the president of the United States, very popular, and she's even more popular as the first lady of the United States. And they're still young and vibrant, and some of us are yearning for those days when he was president. And so he's got a built-in platform. Lady Gaga, her platform is just, she's famous. The Kardashians, they're famous. So football players, sports celebrities, anybody like that has a built-in they don't have to work at it. We're interested in anything they say, sadly. What do I care what this football player cares about politics? Well, because he's famous. That's the way the world is today. Most of us aren't that. One thing you can do, especially for a young writer, beginning writer, is you can piggyback on somebody else's platform. So, for example, you mentioned the book I wrote, Soul Survivor, and I'm glad to hear that that's in Arabic. That's my favorite book of the books that I wrote, because I got to write about my heroes, people who had made a difference in my life. They weren't all Christians. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, were not part of that kind of little evangelical group. And many of the people I wrote about were not. But my faith changed because of them. They became guides to me. They made me see the world in a different way. And Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. So my platform there, I'm piggybacking, I'm riding on the back of famous people. And so maybe you don't know who I am and you don't care what I think, but you might care what Tolstoy thinks or Martin Luther King thinks. And that's a way that a young journalist especially can develop skills. Maybe you aren't famous and maybe you don't have a built-in platform, but you can go to somebody. It could be a pastor, it could be someone who had an amazing experience. I was with a guy the other day who, when he was 17 years old, he fell into a machine and had both his left arm and his left leg cut off, 17 years old. And now he's a great golfer. He plays with one hand. And I used to write articles about people like that. It's not my platform, it's their platform, but it gives me a chance to learn how to write until I have some experiences of my own. So that's one way, but most of us don't have that. And we have to search uh, what is the form that best expresses me that might hook somebody else. For a poet, it's different than a journalist. It's different for a preacher. It's different for a blogger, you know, and these things are changing all the time. The second thing, platform is the first thing that we all have to struggle with and come up with an answer to. The second thing is what I call movement. And that's part of that gravitational force. What keeps you going? The more I think about writing, really good writing, the more it strikes me that good writing reminds me of what a human being is in the process of reading. So what is a human being? Well, we're creatures of time. We live in a way that here it is morning time where I am in Colorado, but it's evening time where you are in Jordan. And I've got my day plotted out and I think I know what's going to happen. But then sometimes unusual things happen that interrupt it. And stories are often built on the suspense of what's going to happen, especially, you know, murder mysteries, things like that. They're masters of suspense, and a good historian is a master of suspense. If you're writing, say, the history of World War II, you never want to say in your writing, of course, we know how it turned out, because the people who were fighting it didn't know how it was going to turn out. And you need to capture that feeling of what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, who's going to win. Actually, I think our fascination with sports has a lot to do with that question of time and suspense. I don't know about you, but once I know the final score, I can never go back and watch, say, a football match, or we're having the World Series right now, World Series game. It's over. It has no suspense. But if I'm caught in the middle of it, my eyes are just glued. What's he gonna do? Is there only 10 seconds left? Can he score in that possible time? And that is because we're creatures of time. One hint I would have for Christian writers particularly is that we try to go too fast. Good writing slows things down. It sets a pace and then builds it at critical moments, but it takes more time. Christians they want to get to the point. We want to get to the lesson at the end, but people are more involved in the story. And then if you do the story well, the lesson becomes obvious. You don't have to say, that's what this story was about. The reader already knows because you've taken them through that drama or that pilgrimage or whatever it is you're expressing. And another aspect of being human, okay, we're creatures of time, and we're also creatures of sense. We're sensory, we see things, we hear things, we smell things, we touch. And any good writing course will tell you that you need to express those sensory words, sensory verbs, so that the reader, again, you've got just this pepper on a page, but for it to work, you've got to somehow create out of that pepper on a page something that reminds you of life. What does it smell like? What does it, somebody just from Ophir just this week sent me this incredible story by this Syrian girl. You probably know the book, Grace, and she's capturing for us what it's like to grow up in a refugee camp. I think it was in Jordan. And she creates just the daily routine of what that's like. And the way she does it is describing what it smells like, what it tastes like, what you hear when you wake up in the morning, surrounded by thousands of people. And that is what grips us. You're publishing it, and it's getting a lot of publicity because she did it so well from that young person's perspective.
Let me tell you, Philip, that she is with us tonight.
Oh,
and she's
great.
watching you right now. Yes.
You want to mention the book, Grace, for people who don't know?
Yeah, let's keep it a suspense, as you said.
Okay. Okay. Very good. All right. And once again, I would just encourage Christian writers, particularly, to give more attention to that. We tend to be people of ideas. We go to church and we hear sermons, and they're about this is what you should think, this is what you should believe. That's very important. But I mean, look at the Bible. The only part of the Bible that's like that is Paul's epistles, pretty much. The Old Testament is stories and history and poetry and prophecies, you know, and the way prophets kind of did these acting out their message so that you didn't miss it. And then Jesus is always telling stories. Somebody asks him a question, he almost never gives a direct answer, maybe 3 times that I can find. He either tells a story or throws a question right back, tells a parable, these brilliant parables that he just kind of spun off on the spur of the moment. It's incredible. So we use the Bible as a model. Let's not get stuck in that sermon technique. Sermons are good for church, but most people don't like to sit down and read a sermon. We have to use different gravitational force to keep their interest. Okay, and then along that line, I would say the gravitational pull within the reader usually goes like this. It's usually not top down. Now, in some kinds of writing, it is. If you're a professor in a university, you have academic publishing, you're required to publish regularly, and who knows if anybody ever reads these things. They're full of footnotes, they're very dense, and they're about these obscure small things. That's the form that you have to do. You can't write a little story and say, this is my thesis. No, you're in a university. This is the way you do it. Okay, but how many people sit around reading, go to the library? Oh, I'd like to read a dissertation, please. Do you have somebody's PhD dissertation that I could read? No. For a few people, yes, but for most of us, no. And so teachers, professors, preachers, they're experts and they've got something to say, and that is their platform. Lady Gaga is famous, that's her platform. But somebody like, well, in our country, Max Lucado or Chuck Swindoll, these are preachers, and they write pretty good books. They have people who help them out, but they're writing because they're experts and they can say something down to people like us sitting in the pew. And there's a good place for that. But I'm not a preacher. And most of your writers probably aren't either. Most of them probably aren't professors. So somehow the best way to hook a reader is to communicate, I know what you're going through. I'm like you. And I've been through something similar. So that's why in a book like, well, for instance, I did this book on prayer. And sometimes I joke that when I don't know the answer to a question, I write a book about it. And that's really true. And this is about the only book where a publisher came to me and said, we'd like you to write a book on prayer. And I said, well, I don't know anything about prayer. I feel terrible about my prayer life. And they said, okay, how about another topic? And then later I started thinking, that's why I should write a book on prayer, because I don't know anything about prayer and I'm not very good at it. So the first thing I did when I wrote that book, I started taking people out to dinner, 50 people in all, usually a couple. My wife and I would take them out to dinner and have a nice meal. And then I'd say, okay, your payment for this meal is you have to answer some questions about prayer. How do you feel about your prayer life? And they almost all said, terrible. Oh, I chose you because I thought you were kind of spiritual people. Well, why doesn't it work for you? Well, I have these questions, and out of that came my book, because I'm trying to hook into what ordinary people experience. And I'm not a preacher teaching them about prayer. I'm a very bad prayer trying to be better. And
so Philip,
yes.
So Philip, when you're talking about your personal relationship and journey with Christ and how these two things, they intertwine and help you to write, how does writing change you as an author before changing your audience and readers?
Well, first I would say it's easier to edit words than a life.
True.
And I know a lot of Christian authors, and actually, as I look at the books that they produce, they tend to be books that they need. And that's true of my books. Why do I keep coming up with books on pain? You know, the Where's God When It Hurts, Disappointment with God. And then recently I wrote one called The Question That Never Goes Away. Well, because pain never goes away. And that whole old time issue of how can a loving God allow this kind of suffering to take place, which we're in the middle of right now in these confused times, these uncertain times as you spelled out. Those questions don't go away. So I struggle with them, and I try to be very honest about this I'm sure of, but some things I'm not sure of. So in all my books about pain, I say right up front, I cannot answer the question of why. Why did this little 3-year-old baby child get leukemia and not the one next door? I don't know. No one knows an answer to that. And whenever people try to pin God down, like Job or Jesus, on why, they evaded the question as if to say you couldn't possibly understand, which is what Job finally said. I spoke of things I couldn't possibly understand. So I think the key is don't say more than you can back up, than you believe. It's tempting. It's tempting to give neat little wrap-up answers, but readers will see right through that, and they won't trust you. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking something that reflects their experience, not just the way it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. Philip, on uncertain days and in situation as such we're living nowadays, on stormy and rainy days, what keeps you writing even when you don't feel like it, even when you find yourself out of words? In other words, what are the disciplines of a productive writer? What keeps you writing amidst uncertainties and disappointments?
Yeah. Funny you mentioned that phrase, out of words, because I'm 70 years old, and usually people are retired by then. And I tell people, writers don't retire, they just run out of words. And I had the great gift of starting my career working in a magazine office. So I would get up start work at 8 o'clock and work till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would sit at my desk, and there was always something to do. So some days I would be writing, some days I'd be editing, some days I would be finding a photo or writing a photo caption or something. But always I'm at my desk working. I never sat around waiting for inspiration. You know, I was paid to do a job. So I did that for about 10 years, and I kept that pattern when I became a freelancer. And now nobody is telling me what time I have to get up, but I get up, and I'm usually at my desk by 8 o'clock, and often there till 6 o'clock. I work long days. There are certain times when the words just aren't coming like they should. And I kind of divide the writing process into like the fingers on a hand. When I write an article, a long article for Christianity Today, CT magazine, which I worked for 26 years, when I would write for them, I would have 2 days, what I call getting ready to write. And that is interviewing, researching, doing an outline. I do long outlines before I write. So 2 days, then 1 day to actually compose words, and then 2 days to clean it up. And I like the research part. I like the interviewing part. That's fun. And I like the editing part because I started as an editor, magazine editor, and I figure I can always make something better. I'm probably not going to make it any worse. But that middle day, oh, that's all pain. And I'll do anything just to get through that middle day. So when I'm really stuck, then I'll kind of go back to one of these more pleasurable days, you know, and do something on a different project, maybe at a different phase. But I've also learned, I know myself, and I later find out I'm just trying to avoid that middle day, the composing day. A better way is just to do what I call a guilt-free draft, so that I just force myself to spit out these words, even though they seem so boring and cliche-ridden and tired and uncreative. And I don't want to discourage your younger writers. I used to think, Grace, that when I got older, I would kind of know more about writing and it would come much easier. Well, I do know more about writing, but what that does is it becomes little messages in my head on that middle day. You said all this before, you are so boring. This is not working. Nobody cares about this. And I have to just kind of fight through those messages, build in rewards, to eat ice cream, do anything it takes to get through that day. And the funny thing is, the next day, the next morning, it never looks as bad as it felt when I was doing the composing process. So I come up with all sorts of tricks just to keep me going. I'll go out and take a bike ride in the middle of my writing just to clear my head, and then I could come back and I always start at the beginning of what I just wrote and kind of get in the flow, and then almost without knowing it, add a few more paragraphs. But if I just started down here, that wouldn't work. So I have all these different tricks, but they're all concentrated in that middle day of facing the blank screen or the blank piece of paper.
Philip, we're really interested to know about one thing. It's true now you are a bestseller with more than 15 million copies in print, a very famous author. You've spoken about taboos. But how did you start your writing career and what challenges did you face? And were your manuscripts refused by publishing houses at first?
Yes.
And how did it make you feel? And what motivated you not to give up and to reach the status,
Right.
the position of a well-known author nowadays? And what would be a word of encouragement you can give for the new writers? You can tell them from your experience.
Sure. When I started, I as I mentioned, I worked for this magazine, Campus Life, and I did anything, sweep the floors, whatever. And I encourage young writers, if you can, find a place that's involved in words, either a newspaper or a publishing company. Doesn't matter what you do, even if you're the mail clerk opening the mail, you're in an environment of words, and you learn after a while what makes one magazine different from another magazine, and what's distinctive, and why this book sells and that book doesn't. These are fun. These are things that you kind of absorb by osmosis, even if you're not writing at all. So, you're not going to be hired as a top editor right when you're out of school. Don't even think about that. Just try to get into a word environment. And back in my day, I started part-time, really, working because I was still going to campus to a college, and the magazine was called Campus Life. So they said, can you write occasionally about what life is like on campuses? I said, sure. And I learned on the job. I had a very wise editor, and this happened again and again. He would call me into his office. I wrote a draft. I thought it was perfect. I'm a young guy, I don't know. And he would kind of lean back in his chair and stroke his chin and say, well, Philip, it's about 80% of the way there. And what he really meant was, this is a piece of trash, throw it away and start over. But he was very gentle, so he'd always say, here are the good things in this article, but you know what, it's just not working. But he wouldn't say, what a piece of trash. He would say, it's about 80% of the way there. And then I knew I need to go back and redo this thing. And then I started sending out freelance. And first I started with Christian magazines. And for the first year, I think this is back in 1972 or something, probably the first article I ever sold, I got $10 for. And then for one, I got $30. And then for one, I got $60. Well, I started writing these piggyback articles where I would write about people who had gone through chaotic experiences. Person who was attacked by a grizzly bear was my first one. And that was fun. I got to interview this guy and was challenged to recreate what it was like for him. And then after Campus Life published it, I thought, you know, Reader's Digest has this thing called Drama in Real Life. Maybe I should send this to Reader's Digest. Now remember, the most I've ever gotten for a freelance article is $60. Okay. Well, Reader's Digest bought it right away and paid me $2,500. and that got me thinking, wow. And I started just cranking out every Saturday. I ruined my Saturdays. Every Saturday I have this file of all these articles that I would send here and there. And a lot of them came back. But yeah, it hurts. But because I had been in a magazine office, I tried not to take it personally, because we would get stacks of articles like this, article submissions. And you know, it's not a perfect world. It would be wonderful if we could spend 15 minutes with each one, but we couldn't. We had a magazine to put out. So we would kind of read a page or two, and some of them could have been developed, but we didn't have time to do that. We just had to make a quick judgment. Will this possibly work or won't it? And you know, I feel for the people out there, because this is their life. This is their baby. And then as a book publisher, you know, people who write a book, that's a huge deal. Usually takes a year or so. And for you, your editor, some of you have to make those kind of judgments. You read 3 or 4 pages and it just doesn't seem to be working. And it may be that you were in a bad mood, or you had something that didn't taste good for breakfast, you know. It's not always the perfect judgment. Maybe it really is. You hear these stories of great books, Harry Potter and various books, that are turned down by 20 publishers before anybody ever takes a chance with them. And those stories are true. And there are a lot of publishers who are kicking themselves for not grabbing the first book that came along. But eventually, because I was learning, because I was trying to write for different magazines, some of them were theological, some of them were completely secular. And now, like just this year, I've written for the New York Times and the Atlantic magazine, and often on religious topics, because that's my life, but in a very different way than when I write for Christianity Today. And I think that's the key, to find what is your natural calling. And I told you, mine was that personal pilgrimage, picking up different parts of the faith. I can't believe this part, the way it was presented to me. What is worth keeping? So, okay, I wrote a book called The Jesus I Never Knew. It's not the Jesus I was taught growing up, thank God. So what is my view of Jesus now? The Jesus I never knew, but it's different than the Jesus I now know. And that's the movement right there. The movement in my books usually takes place in me. I wrote a book called How I Stopped Hating and Started Loving the Psalms. Because I used to hate the Psalms. They said the same thing over and over. And they said things that didn't seem right. You know, God's going to protect me. Well, what about the coronavirus? You know, they would raise more questions than they answered for me. And then I took a look at them, and gradually I learned to love them, because I found them to be prayers, many prayers of lament. God, why don't you do a better job of running the world? You know, that's the real heart of the Psalms. There are a lot of those in there. So find your calling, and then try to figure out, read different things, try to figure out what is that gravitational pull? What pulls you all the way through? What excited you? Why did you keep reading? And then how can you do that when you write something on your own?
Thank you. Philip, you were talking now about the different topics that inspired you to write these different books. And as I said in my introduction, you were one of the few writers who were courageous enough to ask tough questions. And somehow you broke a lot of taboos, you know, with questions such as, where's God when it hurts? Or Soul survivor, is God fair? Is God unfair? Is God silent? Is God hidden? These questions that usually Christians are scared to talk about openly. How did you deal with criticism? Because I'm sure you've been bombarded with lots of criticisms when you were courageous enough to talk about these things. So, how did you deal with criticism? And did it affect your writing? Or like, did you feel down? Did you want to give up? Or no, did it work as reverse psychology? And you said, no, on the other hand, I want to make people think. I want people to step out of their comfort zones, of their inherited beliefs and faith, and I want to make them think. So, how did you deal with this journey of criticism to your writing? And at the same time, when you receive lots of feedback of people who are really encouraged, whose your books they've changed them.
Hmm. Couple things. I think of the book, What's So Amazing About Grace, your name. And when I wrote that, I was skating on ice in a couple of places. Now, this is 1997, so 23 years ago. So it was a different world in so many ways. And there were two places in there that I thought would really knock me out of the Christian bookstores. They would blackball me. One, the issue of homosexuality was just really coming onto the scene. And I had this experience. One of my closest friends, I would say one of my 5 best friends, was a person I thought I knew very well, Mel White. I use his name in the book. And he had written for Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and Francis Schaeffer. And I mean, he knew he was an evangelical. He had taught at Fuller Seminary and blue blood, strong believer. And then one day he pulled me aside and told me that he had another life that nobody knew about. Now they do, because he's written about it. But he was a gay man. He had been very active and had been faking his marriage for a while. He stayed married, but not really married. And that just blew my mind. I thought he was my friend. And I felt I had to write about that because he took me places in understanding the gay world that I just knew nothing about. And I could have just said, well, forget you, we used to be friends, not anymore. But I'm writing a book on grace, right? And grace only is tested when you're around people who do offend you or challenge you. And so I wrote that chapter. And then there was another chapter on Christians and politics, because Christians had, Bill Clinton was the president, and I have been able to interview him. He called me to the White House because he read something I wrote, and he was trying to get a better profile among evangelicals. So he granted me a private interview. And I wrote that at first in an article in Christianity Today, and there's the criticism. My poor mailman, every day he comes with these bags of angry letters, Fortunately, because I had worked in a magazine office. Magazines like angry letters.
I can imagine.
Yeah, because when you read the letters to the editor, it seems like everybody's ticked off about something. Actually, most of the letters that come in are, oh, I love your magazine, I can't wait for it every month. But then it gets so boring. You can publish one of those, but you can't publish 10 of them. So when I was in a magazine, when we'd get a really angry letter, we'd say, oh, good, we can run this one next month, And so that helped a little bit, didn't take the sting completely away. But just to finish that story, so when I finished the manuscript, and this is back in the days when you printed it out and put it in an envelope and mailed it, and I said to my wife, because I've been working for more than a year on this book, I said, this is probably the last book that I'll write for a Christian publisher. I think I'll probably be banned because of this book. I mean, look, it's got a whole chapter on Mel White, and she knew his story, of course. It's got a chapter on Bill Clinton. It's, I'm going to be, if not crucified, at least banned from bookstores. And I learned something. I learned don't underestimate readers. I thought they were going to. I thought I would lose them all, but I had tried to be very honest. I had tried to be biblical. You know, I think it's important when you do approach those thorny issues to be very careful and biblical throughout, because evangelicals share in common that reverence for the Bible, and broader Christians do as well. So it's probably my best-selling book of all, and I never would have imagined. And I would just encourage readers. Now I know
Wow.
in different parts of the world, you've got different restrictions. Some things you can write about that we can't very easily. Some things we can write about that you can't very easily. And you know, you have to figure that out and be careful. It can't be foolish. But I was just encouraged, because what I thought was my last book will become my most lasting book, maybe. Because see, I'm in the process right now of doing a new video curriculum. Book's been out 22 years, and it's still selling, so that they want to reshoot everything. You know, I've gotten older. A lot of the illustrations in the book are a little bit dated, so they're just kind of updating that. So don't sell the audience short. I think the key is to be authentic, to be compelling, and to be biblical in our case.
Thank you. And we love your genuine approach. And we love how you encourage us not to be afraid to ask these questions. And as I said in my introduction, your books have made a revolution, because you have spoken up on behalf of thousands of people who have these questions and who wouldn't dare to ask them. And at the same time, you helped us not to abandon our faith, despite the darkness seen, as I said. Now, going back to talk about, topics such as pain and suffering and disappointments, in your opinion, we are living now in uncertain days, as I said. It's unprecedented times. Does pain prevent people from turning back to God, or does it play a reverse psychology effect and it draws the person closer to God? And if pain vanishes, if there's no more pain in life, would it increase my faith? For those who ask these questions, who struggle with these questions, what do you tell them tonight?
Some people, it is a barrier to faith. So they will say, I like Jesus, but I just can't buy the whole Christian thing, because how could God allow the COVID-19 virus, for example? And for some people, and I've done many articles on people like this, they go through very hard times, and then later they look back and say, that was the time I grew most. I'm grateful for that. I wouldn't change it. And I've come up with this phrase that kind of summarizes those people. I say that I've learned that redeemed pain redeemed, impresses me more than pain removed. Because some of the people who most have ministered to me are people who've been through very hard times, and yet they've turned it into good somehow, which is the pattern we have. I'd like to just give, and I would never do this in my writing, just give three quick observations that may apply in the middle of the COVID situation. First is, it's a good world we're living in. You can forget that when you're in the middle of a pandemic. But actually, I was reading the other day, it blew my mind. 99% of all viruses are good, beneficial. We couldn't live without them. We have trillions of them in our body, and they help us with digestion. They help us against bacteria. However, viruses tend to mutate, and especially when people get close to animals, like they think now it came from a bat, there can be these jumps across animal species. And so don't forget that this is a good world we live in. I live in the state of Colorado. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And when the virus first started, it was still cold and snowy here. And my wife and I would take snowshoe hikes through these beautiful evergreen forests coated with snow. And it was just a reminder, it's a good world. Second thing, so it's a good world. Second thing, is that God is not pleased with this world either. Jesus told us to pray that God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's not being done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what we're supposed to pray for. And I tell people, I've been to several places where there were these school shootings and people are kind of scratching their heads trying to figure it out. And I say, whatever you're feeling, God feels more. You feel grief, God feels more grief. And you say, how can you say that? Well, because God gave us a face. God gave us Jesus. And you just follow Jesus around and see how he responded to people who were suffering. All kinds of people, a widow, a woman with a menstrual problem, a Roman soldier whose servant had fallen ill. Jesus never said, well, you deserved it or you're being punished. Always responded with comfort and healing. God wants the planet and has promised that the planet will be different one day than it is now. So don't judge God by exactly what you see around you right now. God is upset about the million people who have died of COVID, 2 million. And the last thing is that, how do I say this? That even the hardest times can indeed be redeemed. There's that word. We will never live in a pain-free world. And frankly, I wrote these books with Dr. Paul Brand on leprosy. People with leprosy don't feel pain, physical pain at all, but they're among the most miserable people I've met because of the way they're treated. And we don't have time to go into that, but again and again, I've seen people who have gone through hard times, and at the time they're thinking, oh, God, why did you allow this? And now they look back and say, that was the time that made me the person I am today. And that's the pattern we get in the New Testament. It says, rejoice in your suffering. Why? Because it hurts? No, but because out of it, God can create good things, perseverance, patience, and it goes through a list of those things. I think of God as the great recycler. He takes things that are junk that we want to throw away and makes out of them. Like I took an old computer down, and they made me pay money to have them recycle it. And I'm sure somebody scraped little pieces of minerals off it, and they probably recycled it into a mobile phone, this big, much smarter. And that's what God does, takes the refuse and somehow makes out of it a garden of delights. And that's a Christian story. That's what the story of the crucifixion is all about. The worst thing that could possibly happen that turned into the best, the salvation of the world and the promise of Easter.
Amen. Beautiful. Philip, thank you so much for your time, for what you shared, for your honesty and genuine writing, and for giving us and for giving your readers the permission to doubt, but giving us reasons not to abandon faith. And thank you for leading us, leading your readers to find faith when it is most severely put to test. It's been an honor and it's been a joy. I wish we don't have to end. I wish we can still speak for hours because I know time flies in speaking with you. Thank you so much. God bless you. We're so honored that you accepted to be with us tonight. And we pray that the Lord will continue to bless you. And as your pen keeps flowing certainty in uncertain times. Thank you all, everyone, for taking the time to attend this webinar, and we hope it was beneficial and encouraging for you. Don't forget to join us next week, same day, same time, for another webinar with a very special guest too. And for those who want to register for CAWI, please follow the links that are being typed on the screen right now and stay tuned with us on social media for all updates. Philip, thank you one more time, and we hope we can meet in Jordan when this whole pandemic thing is over, and we can sit and talk for hours about what God has given you and what you would like to share with your readers. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.